If you get the wrong designer in there who doesn't know how to think through your target audience or the goal you're trying to get with this one piece of marketing, because so many designers will give you a beautiful design and initially you're like, wow, that's really pretty. But is it leading your reader to your call to action? Because in marketing, you're trying to make money. You're trying to, it is a business. Make money or get people to take action. I guess I shouldn't resort always back to money, but you're trying to get people to take action. And if the design doesn't lead to whatever that call to action is, then it's failed.
Megan Giles, welcome to the ROI Online Podcast.
Amazing, right? Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Megan, you are this creative genius that's a part of the ROI team, and I'm excited to have you share your brilliance with us today.
Well, thank you for that. I humbly accept that compliment.
So, Megan, where did you fall in love with design?
Oh, man. So I grew up on a cattle ranch in Kansas and out in the country.
Lots of design opportunities.
Yes, obviously.
There, right?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
for sure. Out feeding cows. And so one thing of country living is you join 4-H at a very young age. And I had no interest in the animals, but I had an amazing art teacher, Mrs. Harden. And then my parents really did believe in my art skills and sent me to a couple art classes in junior high and grade school. And then in high school, I had the same art teacher from 4-H in my high school class. And I would even, I had talked my math teacher into, as soon as I finished my math homework for the day, I had my own spot in the art room and I would go down there and paint for the rest of math class, or if study halls or whatever. I was in the art room all the time. So I really had a great teacher. And then my junior or senior year, we were talking about what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And it was either, I had no idea what graphic design was. She told me, well, somebody has to create the ads. It's like, okay, that makes sense. All right, sounds good. So it was either go to K-State for graphic design or go to beauty school and be a hairstylist, because I also love doing hair. And so I did a year at K-State, and halfway through, I was like, college isn't for me. I'm quitting. My parents said, no, you're not. And I was like, well, I'll just finish the year and then I'm going to go to beauty school. So fast forward, I did beauty school, was a hairstylist for 6 years. Halfway through, realized they didn't teach me how to build a business. So struggling along, talking to my mom one day, she said, well, why don't you see, I was in Amarillo at the time, big city for me at that point in time. And she said, why don't you see if the local community college has a graphic design program? You were always interested in it. You still draw a little bit. It's like, okay. I was enrolled a week later and got my associates in graphic design. And then when I was about to finish up with that, I decided maybe I wasn't ready for the real world yet. So maybe I should get a degree. So teacher told me about UNT, went down to University of North Texas in Denton, told me about UNT. I was enrolled a week later. Like when I make decisions, I just run with it, and moved down a couple months later. And then in that program, they have a very intense art program, and realized maybe this isn't really for me. So finished out my bachelor's in business and then got into the corporate world. And that's the short story of how I got into the art space.
Well, I love that. So I think that the folks that are listening to this, they're entrepreneurs, they're business owners, they're marketing directors, and they're relating, because a lot of times now this business world crashes into the creative world. And what I've really noticed is that here's how it goes. The business owner finally goes, I think we need to get our act together. I think we need a website or something. And so we'll put up with this creative person for a little bit and get that hurried, get it done and get it out of the way and get back to real business. But the truth is, it's a real aspect of an important business process, especially now and in the future. Would you agree, or am I wrong?
Yes, for sure. The words you use matter, but nobody's going to read those words if you don't have design pulling them in.
Mm-hmm.
So design is a key aspect to all things marketing.
So I think that's a beautiful statement, because a lot of people say we're in an attention economy, but I disagree. I believe we're in a focus economy. You can get someone's attention. You can walk in a restaurant, drop a book on the floor. Everybody will stop what they're doing and look at you like an idiot. And then they'll quickly go back to what they were doing. You got their attention, but you didn't earn their focus.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what you have to offer really brings it into helps us overcome the challenge of actually earning their focus and keeping their focus.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions I always get is, and I'm curious about your answer, is what is creative design?
So creative design would be the supporting role in your overall marketing strategy. So you have your content and the words you use matter for sure. But again, nobody's going to read those words unless you draw them in with design. So you have to creatively think through how the end user is going to read it. So, and that's where your type treatments come in. So big headers, the fonts you use matter because they can create an emotional connection with the end user, depending on who your target audience is.
So when you say emotional connection, I think that's a missed aspect in when people are approaching creative design, especially to solve a business problem. Why is that emotional aspect so important?
Because that's how we make decisions based on emotion. Even the big high up CEO, and it's been proven over and over again in lots of studies, which I cannot quote, but I do read a lot of business books that quote those studies.
Yeah,
And
there's a part of the brain, the old part of the brain stem, that no decision is approved until the brain stem, I call it the bodyguard, signs off on that decision. And it can't process words. It can't process language. It does it based on emotion. And I think that's so neglected when people sit down and go, okay, we're going to do this strategy, this marketing strategy, but they don't take into consideration all the things in your world.
for sure.
It's dismissed often as like this ditzy little
Artsy.
cheerleader. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
So
Which it can be if you get the wrong designer in there who doesn't know how to think through your target audience or the goal you're trying to get with this one piece of marketing. Because so many designers will give you a beautiful design and initially you're like, wow, that's really pretty. But is it leading your reader to your call to action? Because in marketing, you're trying to make money. You're trying to, like, it is a business, make money or get people to take action. I guess I shouldn't resort always back to money, but you're trying to get people to take action. And if the design doesn't lead to whatever that call to action is, then it's failed.
that call to action is coming from the business owners. Like, I would like to have something to show for this investment of time and money, not just something cute and pretty that when I show my mom, she's going to be all proud of me. But actually, I need it to help me move the needle in my business.
Right.
And I love what you're saying there. So tell me how do you write a creative brief for graphic design?
So my thought is similar to a content strategy. It all starts with your end goal. What are you trying to do with this piece? Whether it's a website, a brochure, a bookmark randomly. I have designed one in the last week. And even your business card. What is your goal with it? It's to get people to take some sort of action. So I always begin with the end in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And
so is there like a framework you follow, or is there like a kind of give us some insight on how you systematically walk through that?
oh, systems. I love systems and processes. Mine are not ironed out completely yet. It
We
usually
expect
goes
that.
with the flow of the conversation.
We would expect that from a creatively person, right?
Right. I love the idea of processes and systems, but I feel stifled a little bit when I get into them. When I'm in a creative mood, I don't want to follow a system. I want to just go with the flow and see where it takes me.
But how does that apply to business? I mean, that a business owner is not going to really accept that as a legitimate business process. And so one of the things that really excited me when I learned about Story Brand, and we have a common experience in our background of Story Brand as well, right? And you're our creative lead for ROI Online. But oftentimes I think that process misses out on a bigger thing where you come into play. And that's by following that story brand process in an emotional application as well. Would you disagree?
I guess I do loosely use everything I've learned as a story brand guide. So the 7 steps, while I do think through content wise on that, I do think through it creatively and visually. How can I represent each of those pieces?
For example, it says, all right, we need to identify our hero.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when you're thinking in the creative process,
Mm-hmm.
how would we resolve or take that into consideration?
So one thing that I've started asking more in creative briefs is, what does your hero wear? What do their clothes look like? And I think that helps visualize what that person looks like and how they want to present themselves to the world, and probably what they're going to be attracted to.
So you're emotionally connecting. So it's like in the story brand process, we need to be able to communicate. We understand you and you're safe here because we get you. And so when we look at a piece of creative, the images, the atmosphere, the feeling of that piece, not just the perfectly written text. Actually, the text is secondary. Our eyes explore it differently, right?
So most creatively, you want to design it to draw readers in, and so that it leads them to the text. Sometimes it might be a large picture. And if that picture is of a person, let's say the screen is the marketing piece, and you're framing that person, you want the person to look towards the text where you want the eyes to go so that they get the message. Whereas if it's like this and you have the model facing off the page, the reader's eyes are going to lead off the page and get distracted by whatever's in their background, dirty sink or dishes, that kind of thing, and not read your message.
I love that. And I didn't really, when I started looking at your stuff, and I was I spent some time in the marketing the mind states area, right? And I started to see this, you have this natural connection with the images that support the overall message that we're trying to do. And it takes into consideration the state of mind that someone is in when they're looking at that piece of content.
Yes. So a good example, bringing in the mind states side of things in the research that Will Leach has done. One thing I really love that he suggests, and I've used this a lot, is when sourcing images, you want to also try to get the reader imagining themselves in that piece. So if you're, can't think of a good example right now. Let's say you want somebody to read a book.
Right.
And so instead of just showing them a book cover, you want to show an image where the camera is kind of at the back of the model's head, looking towards this person reading a book, because then it's easier for the reader to imagine themselves sitting there reading that book.
That's a beautiful example. You're setting up an aspirational image, because when they're evaluating a website, when they're evaluating a brochure, there's a reason why they're there in that moment. And it's because they're wanting to overcome a challenge. They're looking for a solution that's going to get them to that place in the future they imagine themselves in.
Right.
And you're facilitating that emotional transformation from, hey, I'm in a jam, to, oh, I see a path.
Right. Yes. See, you're better with words than I am.
But you're
Everything
better.
you just said, I could just match up images to it.
Exactly. And that's why that's a beautiful point, because it illustrates why creative is such an important aspect, not just text.
Right. Yes.
Your brain is deciding how much energy to spend here. And if I'm going to read text, means I need to move from a fiber optic information processing process to one of those 1440 modems where it goes right. That's when you start reading, you're burning energy. That's you're getting information in a slow way, and your brain doesn't have much patience for that. So everything that you design is, you're actually, the emotional aspect is bringing in a fiber optic information process that supports someone that does want to go to the old modem information.
And slow down. Right. And that's exactly right. When it comes to designing, especially when you have a text heavy piece, that's why you want those pull quotes and the headers to be bigger so that people can scan easily. That's why bullet points are really big. And even within bullet points, highlighting keywords in that so that the reader can easily scan and realize, okay, no, I actually want to read this content. I want to dig down deeper.
Exactly. So you're impacting that emotional process, that immediate, the bodyguard is going to give you permission to spend a little time here. But when we make decisions, we made it emotionally, but guess what we do? We go look for the text to logically support the decision that we made.
Right.
And so that's where your brilliance comes in and greases the rails through that process, that emotional process, right?
Exactly.